Good morning. Kevin, I'm just going to tell you, get ready. I don't think we're going in the order that I had. It's funny how sometimes you get, I don't know, you have everything all put together and then a week happens or whatever happens and it seems like God kind of changes and directs, and luckily it all works with the same story. Though I did like the title of the sermon, Whitney maybe kind of pare it down, chosen by God, acting a fool. I actually went more with you can be chosen by God and still act like an idiot was where I was going, but that seemed a little long. We're going to be in Judges today. And so if you don't know, 7th book of the Bible, the Old Testament, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth. And so if you want to go ahead and turn there, and what we're looking at, we're going to look at the account of a guy who, to me, he's an enigma, a mystery, a quandary, whatever you want to call it, Samson. I was given a book, 1974, the South Hutchinson Primary Department gave me a book called God's Early Heroes, and Samson was the cover person on it. And a lot of times that's how we tend to think of Samson so many times as this great hero. I mean, he's in Hebrews, talking about heroes of the faith, and he is. But I think that many times we look at the heroic end of it, and Samson is different than a lot of other Bible, I guess, heroes, whatever you want to call it. A lot of the heroes of the Bible, the men and the women that we talk about, they came on the stage very quietly. They kind of show up, not assuming, and then over time they kind of take their place and they accomplish amazing things for the Lord. Samson was different in the fact that Samson, before he was ever born, an angel of the Lord came to an infertile woman and her husband and said, "You're going to have a child, and he's going to be set apart by the Lord, and he will begin the deliverance of his people." And so there were some vows that were given that said that she was not to have anything to do with the vine, so no grapes, no wine, no raisins, no nothing. And that in the same way he was to be a Nazirite, meaning that he was not to have anything from the vine. He was never to touch or come in contact with a dead body, anything of that. He was never to have his head shaven, or actually have his hair cut at all. There were Nazirite vows that were set up to set him apart. And but the thing is that we see John the Baptist in the same way was set apart. Boy, did their lives take different paths. And that's where I think Samson many times he's a quandary to me because of the fact that he had so much promise. But Samson was very selfish. Samson was selfish. He was reckless. He was careless. It really seems like in many ways the only person that Samson ever cared about was Samson. And as you read his story, we read about his heroic events, and we're going to kind of talk about some, and I want to give you the Cliff Notes version of it. But, you read through Samson's life, and what you find is time after time there are these amazing heroic events, but so many times they are surrounded, or they surround, such great moral failures. And so, what we find is that in the story of Samson, again, in the beginning, this is the time, Samson was one of the judges in Israel. He ruled for 20 years. Interesting thing was that for all of his strength, you notice that the Israelites were under Philistine rule when Samson was born. They were under Philistine rule when Samson died. For all of his strength and all of his power, the one thing he could never do was deliver his people. But we find that, Samson early on in his life, there's one of these, he goes down to what they call Timnah. He goes down and he finds a Philistine woman that he wants to marry. And of course his parents try to talk him out of it because that's not who you marry. And he says, "No, I want what I want, so get her." It's kind of, the biblical translation is, go get her for me. She is the right one for me. But, what we find, so, the parents try to withstand, eventually they give in. So we read a little bit later that Samson went down with his mom and his dad, went to Timnah to go and to get this woman, so that then, she would be his fiance. While they're there, Samson wanders off into a vineyard, place he never should have been. While he's in the vineyard, a lion comes out, attacks him, and the Spirit of the Lord came upon him in power, and he kills the lion, rips it apart with his bare hands, leaves it there. So then he goes back, and now he joins up with his parents. Okay, doesn't tell them what happened. They go on to Timnah. He decides, yep, I like this girl, so we're going to marry her. Mom, Dad, make it happen, and then they leave. So then they come back a little bit later. It's the wedding feast. So once again, they're making their way. What does Samson do? He takes off into the vineyard again, okay, and wants to check out what he had done before. There he finds this lion carcass. The lion carcass is now bones, and what we see is that there is a beehive that has started in it, and it's producing honey. So what is Samson, the guy who shouldn't be in the vineyard anyway, who is never to touch or come near a dead body or anything unclean, what does he do? Well, he just sticks his hand into the honey pot, right inside the dead body, pulls some out, eats a little bit of it on the way, takes some to his parents, says, here, you ought to have some too. They're like, that's delicious, never tells them where it came from. So he not only defiles himself, but he defiles them. I mean, everything about it. And then he goes and he has a wedding. He's going to have this wedding feast for this Philistine woman that he wants to marry. So while he's there, he makes this bet with them, that with his groomsmen, didn't bring any groomsmen, makes a bet with them and says, hey, 30 sets of clothing, I got a riddle you can't answer. And they're like, okay. So he gives them this riddle, which basically the riddle is, he says, out of the sweet, something to eat, out of the eater, something to eat, out of the strong, something sweet. And which interesting that Samson takes his failure, his sin, and turns it into a riddle. Nothing like flaunting what you got. They can't answer it, and he gives them 7 days. And so they can't come up with the answer, so they go to his wife and they say, hey, we need you to go find out what this, find out the answer. And so she begs, she pleads, she cries, everything else. And finally Samson gives in and tells her the answer to the riddle. He's told nobody else. So she goes and tells the groomsmen. They come and give him the answer to the riddle. And at which point, and I wonder if his wife was bothered by being compared to a heifer. But, he says, you plowed with my heifer. Meaning the fact that that was my riddle, you went and found out the answer. Well, he's mad. And so he takes off, and he goes a couple of towns over, and when he gets a couple of towns over, then he says, well, I'm going to pay off the bet. And so he goes and he kills 30 Philistines, takes their clothes, and then comes back and gives them to the groomsmen. So he pays off the bet, by killing people. But he's so mad that he leaves, and he leaves his fiancée, his wife there. So he goes back to his father's house. Well, the father of the bride, he thinks, well, Samson didn't have anything to do with her, so he gives her to the best man. Says, here, you can, so now she's married to you. Well, so Samson cools off, he turns around, decides he's going to come back, come to find out, she's been given to another man in wedded bliss. And so now he's really ticked, okay? And so it says that he went out, and at that point then he goes and he gets, I'm trying to remember my stories here. By golly, he gets so many things that Samson did. He goes and he gets 300 foxes or jackals, whichever it is. He ties their tails together. He sticks torches in their tails, and then he sets them loose. And they go off, and basically what they do is they destroy the entire food source for the Philistines. Okay? So when the Philistines find out that it was Samson that did this, what do? They go and they get his fiancée and her father, her former fiance, and they burn them alive, because they're mad. And then, they decide that they need to get Samson. Well, in the meantime, Samson is now really ticked, so he goes out and he slaughters, we don't know how many, a great number of Philistines. Then he runs and he hides in the cave. Well, so he's in the cave. The Philistines come, and they now have decided, well, we can't do a thing to Samson, so therefore we're going to go and we're going to attack Judah. Okay, so they camp outside of Judah. Well, the guys inside are like, hey, we don't have an army. Why are they camped out here? So they go out and they talk to him and they say, well, it's because of what Samson did. And they're like, well, can we go get him for you? I mean, can we, so they muster 3,000 men. They go to the cave where Samson is. They talk him into coming out. Samson says, I'll go with you. Tie me up, but only if you don't kill me yourselves. Okay, sounds good to us. So they tie him up. They take him. They hand him over to the Philistines. As soon as they do, he breaks the ropes and picks up the jawbone of a donkey, and he kills 1,000 Philistines. I mean, this dude makes the Terminator look like an amateur, doesn't he? I mean, he did like, yeah. And so he kills 1,000 Philistines with a donkey's jawbone. And so, but then we find a short time later, and this is kind of where Samson's downfall really begins. His next story is he decides he goes down to Gaza, another place that he shouldn't have been. He sees a prostitute, another place he shouldn't have been, that he wants to spend the night with. So he does. Well, the Philistines find out that Samson's there, so they camp out at the city gates. I guess they probably lock the gates so that he can't leave, and they're going to kill him in the morning. Well, in the middle of the night, Samson wakes up. He goes down. Like I said, gates are locked. He's like, okay, I gotta get out of here. So he just takes the gates and pulls them completely off. Posts, door, everything. Yanks them off and carries them up to the top of a hill facing Hebron and leaves them there. Okay? We find out later is that he finds somebody else. And we've all heard, what is the phrase? When I say Samson, what's the name that goes with it? Delilah. Samson and Delilah. So he finds a woman that he is in love with. And he's got to marry her. Well, so he goes to her. He wants to marry her. And the Philistines come to Delilah and the leaders, and they say, okay, here's the deal. We need you to get Samson to tell you what the secret to his strength is. And if you do that, then we're going to give you all of this money. We're going to give you all of this money if you will do that. And so she says, oh, she'll do it. So, they're married. She starts asking Samson what it is that, is the secret to his strength. He starts telling her stories. He lies to her. He says, well, if you tie me with fresh bowstrings, then I'll be as weak as any man. And so she's like, okay. She ties him up and then says, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. And he hops up and breaks them off. Okay? So then she asks again, this time it's fresh ropes, and then if you weave my hair into a loom and put the pin in it, then and so she does this, and every time he's asleep, she's like, Samson, the Philistines are upon you, and he wakes up, and he tears everything off, and yeah. I don't know if he did that, but it would have been fitting. I don't know if he was that. I don't know if Samson was all that bold. We always think of him as had big muscles and being strong. I don't know that he was. I mean, there's nothing. His strength didn't come from his muscles. In fact, it didn't even come from his hair. It came from the Spirit of the Lord, which came upon him. But then she starts questioning. So now here she is. She's been asking for the secret to his strength, and then she starts going, "You don't love me. You tell me the truth. You've lied to me all these times." That's kind of. And so she nags him to death. And finally gives in. He's like, fine, whatever. You shaved my hair, it's never been cut, that's the way it is. So now she knows he told me the truth. And so she calls the Philistines, she gets a hold of the Philistines and she says, I know the answer, so bring the money because tonight's the night. And so she has somebody come and gets him to fall asleep and then has his hair cut, they shave his head. And then a heavy sleeper. But anyway, they cut his hair, and then she ties him up, and then says, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. And he gets up, and the scriptures even say that he thought just like normal, he was just going to break the bonds, and he was going to do his thing. And he finds out that the Spirit of the Lord has left him. And, I say this because this is where I kind of changed. It is easy so many times that we read those stories and we think about Samson and all the heroic deeds. But the fact is that, even though God used Samson's failures to bring glory to himself, the fact is that God never tempted Samson. God wasn't the reason that Samson did the things that he did. He used it to confront the Philistines. But, in many ways, we put ourselves in the same spots We allow by our own evil desires that we are enticed, we are dragged away because we put ourselves in bad positions, because we think that we know better, because we think that we can do what we want to do. And as I think of, and if any of you saw, I kind of put on Facebook this morning, there was just kind of this phrase that hit me, and it was to finish strong. We read the story of Samson and we see failure after failure after failure. And a lot of times I don't think that we equate Samson with ourselves, because we don't have supernatural strength, because we don't have long flowing hair, because we didn't live at that time. But I don't think that we see the connection sometimes. And the fact is that there are many of us that if we were to go and look through our history, we would find that Samson is not the only poster child for poor choices. We are as well. We've got our series of failures. We've got our series of stumbles. We've got incident after incident of poor choices, at times when we tried to do it on our own, times when we tried to take off on our own and do things ourselves. And in that, we are so much like Samson. That's why James did. James wrote in chapter 1, he said, when tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when by his own evil desire he is dragged away and enticed. Then, after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death. If Samson had never gone to Timnah, if Samson had never gone to Gaza, if Samson had never gone to Delilah, if he had never gone to the vineyard, to me, Samson's life, if Samson were to die and be buried today, I think the fitting epitaph would have been what could have been on his headstone. Charles Spurgeon kind of summed it up best. He said this about Samson's life. His whole life is a series of miracles and follies. His whole life is a series of miracles and follies. At the end of his life, Samson was bound. They came, they bound him, they took him off, they gouged out his eyes. And then they set him to grinding grain. And I heard it said one time that the life of Samson is an illustration of the binding, blinding, and grinding effects of sin. Sin binds us, it blinds us to what we're doing, and then it sets us to just putting our nose to the grindstone, day in and day out. And I don't mean that as far as going to work. I mean the fact that we become slaves and we are worn out by the sins of our life. Many times they are things that we've done over many years. Sometimes they're a mistake that we make. But when I say that this phrase that has been running through my head is to finish strong, and my point is, we serve a God of second chances. Because we read the story of Samson, and what do we find? That Samson, through all of his failures, through all of his stumbles, through all of his moral failings, what happens? Yes, he wakes up and he finds that the Spirit of the Lord is gone. And I'm not sitting here telling you that God leaves us when we do wrong. But the fact is, there are times when we try to do it on our own and we feel like we are absolutely alone. And it's because we're no longer operating within God's will. We're no longer operating within His guidelines and in His direction of where He wants us. What are we doing? We're operating on our own strength, on our own power, making our own decisions. And what does it feel like? It feels like we are absolutely, utterly alone. But the thing that we know is, just as Samson did, Samson was brought out in chains and in shame, and he was forced to entertain the Philistines. They brought him out to make sport of him, to make fun of him. Because this guy who had tried, he had tried to make society and culture love him. He wanted to fit in. And that same society and that same culture hated him. Wanted to destroy him. And a lot of us are in the same spot. We've made decisions. We've wanted people to like us. We've wanted to fit in. We've wanted to go along, to get along. And what we find is that because of who we are, because of what we call ourselves, because of the one that we've given our lives to, the world hates us. Culture wants to bring us down. It wants to bury us. But in that moment, Samson, I think his greatest miracle happened. It wasn't killing the 1,000. It wasn't slaughtering. It wasn't tying all the foxes. It wasn't carrying the gates. It honestly, it wasn't even pushing over the temple of Dagon. To me, the greatest miracle in Samson's life is the moment when he finally surrendered again to God. When he realized and he said, "One more time, Lord. One more time. I screwed it all up. And I don't want to do it anymore." That, to me, is the greatest miracle. The most heroic thing that Samson ever did was to surrender his life completely to God in that moment. And to say, "Give me one more chance. One more shot." We all remember that Samson pushed down the columns. We all remember that he killed more that day than he had throughout his entire life. But what I would like you to remember is that if we will surrender fully, we can finish strong. See, I think in a lot of ways, we have this worry, this fear, that we've gone too far, we've screwed up too much, we've done too many things, we've gone too far, whatever it is. And my point is that because we serve a God of second chances, at any moment we can make that decision and say, "You know what? I have done in the past. I have missed, I have failed, I have stumbled, I have tripped. There are times when I have not been the person that I should be. There are times when I have not done the things that I should do. There are times when I have not followed the God that I should be following, that I've taken off on my own path, but I don't want that to define who I am anymore. I want to change that right now, and that's all it takes." You may be sitting here and you're thinking, "Well, I'm such a failure, and I don't know how God could ever take me back." I wonder if that's the thought that crossed Samson's mind. See, a lot of you think I've wandered too far. There's no way. There is no way. I am too far from God. There is no way back. I wonder if Samson thought the same thing. A lot of us think that we just screwed up everything. There is no way to ever make it right again. And I wonder if Samson thought the same thing. And maybe he did. But the last thing that he did was he said, "Lord, I've blown it. And I don't want to do it anymore. So give me one last chance." And I'm going to ask you to stand, and we're going to have our time of decision. And in this moment, I just want to ask you, if you're sitting here today and you feel like maybe you have gone too far, you feel like you have failed, you feel like you haven't been, I don't care what it is, the mother, the father, the boss, the son, the daughter, you haven't been the Christian that you should be. You feel like you've missed it in many chances. You feel like you have missed opportunities. Don't let that define you. Make today the day that you bow your head and simply say, "Lord, I'm asking you right now in this moment, one more chance. Give me the strength, give me the power to bring glory to you in everything that I do, that I may finish strong in what you've called me to do." We're going to have our time of decision. And we're going to open up our prayer rooms. If you would like somebody to pray with you, to pray for you, then I'm just going to ask you to step into one of those. You don't have to say a word. You don't have to say a thing. Maybe you have a decision to make today. And if that is the case, then I invite you to come and to make that decision. Maybe you just need prayer. You need somebody to pray with you, to pray for you. We would love to do that. If you have a decision to make, I invite you to make it now.